Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
There's been a huge rise in the number of newborn babies taken into care. In 7 years, more than 13,000 babies in England were in effect born into the care system, meaning they were removed from their mothers immediately after they'd been born or shortly after. More than 2,000 newborn babies were taken straight into care in 2013, the study found. 1 in 3 were removed from teenage mothers, and almost half of the mothers already had other children in care. One mother, Louise, not her real name, neglected her first child and had her second baby taken away at just 2 days old.
I had everything ready. I had his cot, I had his pushchair, his Moses baskets, I even had his bedroom and everything sorted for him. And then I had to leave hospital with no baby, just a balloon and my stuff. It tore me apart, crying and crying and crying. Even now, I still cry, and it's been, nearly 2 years now.
The Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, who is also Women's Minister, told the BBC that the government wants to get tougher on social services that fail vulnerable young people and their families.
What we know is that sometimes there can be a cycle of continued failure. Somebody who was perhaps abused or didn't have good parenting role models, then they have their own children, they can't do that, they have their children taken away. And that's why today we are announcing that those children's social services departments that are failing will be taken over. Social workers do a really difficult job in making decisions about, for example, taking away very young children and pushing them into the care system. But we know that there are failings. We know there can be failings of leadership and management, and we know that by bringing outside people in, or very experienced, they can raise standards, which is the right thing to do for vulnerable children across the country.
Well, in the studio with me, Nick Crichton, a family judge who sits on the board of the charity Pause. It's a charity that works with women whose children have been taken into care, and also Cathy Ashley, chief executive of the Family Rights Group, which supports the families of children in care. Thank you both for coming in. You've both obviously got a huge amount of experience dealing with families like this. Cathy, first of all, tell us what it's like when you see these women having babies that are taken away because they just can't keep them.
Well, it's incredibly harrowing hearing their stories about just the process of actually their babies being removed from them. Often these mothers are expected to go to court within days, weeks of actually giving birth, and you can imagine the mental state. And one of our frustrations is that actually far too little is being done in terms of working with these mothers in the early stages of pregnancy, but also after their children are removed, they're just often left adrift, and it's not surprising that they then get pregnant again. And in fact, the more children are removed, the shorter the space between them getting pregnant another time. So we're really neglecting both children and these often young women by not working with them both in pregnancy and post-removal. You see it, obviously, Nick, from the perspective of sitting in the courts. What's your view when you see these women?
I completely endorse what Cathy has said. It's important to remember that the court's function is to consider what is in the best interest of each child. And if, as we frequently have, you have a woman who has serious issues with the misuse of drugs and alcohol, with mental health issues, living in a domestic violence situation, is that child going to be safe? And frequently these are mothers who have already had one or two. In one case, I had to remove the 14th child from the same mother because she had been completely unable to connect with services which were designed to help her. But once the child has been removed, there are no services, or very few services, put in place to help her to understand what has brought about the removal of that child and help her to get into a better place. The Family Drug and Alcohol Court, which has been running for 8 years, was an initiative which I was initially able to start. And we are working intensively with parents in these situations, trying to help them to get into a position to provide good enough care for this child, because if we can enable a mother to hold on to this child, the risk that she will go on having another child every year indefinitely is significantly reduced.
Let's bring in Claire Mason, because she's one of the report's authors. And Claire, your specific task in compiling the report was to talk to the mothers whose experiences were being drawn upon for the report.
Yeah, that's right.
We were hearing there about how often these women are having babies again and again to replace the baby that they lost. Just tell us what these women are like, have been like, that you've been talking to. Have there been common factors for all of them?
Yeah, I spoke to 72 women who'd been through the cycle of recurrence that you've been describing. I mean, I think it's really important to remember that they're not all the same. They've all got a unique story, but certainly we have been able to see some themes emerging from the data and from those really important interviews. I think, as Kathy's already outlined, these are vulnerable women that have had faced a number of adversities in their own childhood and have problems in their adulthood. Domestic abuse was a really common feature, as was childhood trauma, sexual abuse and maltreatment, neglect. And I think at the moment, little is being done really to support these women, particularly after they've had a child removed. And we're not looking at how we can better help them with those traumatic experiences. Rather, we're layering on top another traumatic experience by removing their child and leaving them alone to cope, to pick up the pieces.
You're all saying exactly the same thing, which is that these are women not getting support. I've read that you've been described previously, Nick, as seeing this with a mix of empathy, which clearly you've got, but also exasperation.
Absolutely. We cannot go on processing people. If we are just going to keep removing a child and removing a child and removing a child without doing anything about the core problem, we are condoning more and more children being taken into the care system. And very small children who are adopted can do very well, but the slightly older children don't do well in care. We have to address these problems. The Family Drug and Alcohol Court is doing significantly better than ordinary care proceedings in helping these women and these families.
Because it's offering the help that you're all saying isn't always there.
Yes. And the PAUSE programme, Hackney have identified, the London Borough of Hackney, that of 320 children they have in care, 205 come from 49 women. And across the country, local authorities are beginning to come up with very similar figures. And the PAUSE project is still quite young, so we await the evaluation of that. But what we need
is doing this similar in terms of just giving extra help to these
it's the same cohort of women with the same difficulties that Claire is talking about. And what we need to recognise is that we don't need small projects trying to deal with these problems. We need to have local and national government beginning to address these issues and provide the support, because the emotional cost to these children and their parents is immense, but the financial cost to the taxpayer is immense. And we actually need to understand that and start working in a coordinated way to help this significantly small number of people who are providing a disproportionately large number of children for the care system.
I think one of the really interesting findings from Claire's interviews was the large number of care leavers amongst the population of mothers who are having children repeatedly removed. And I think the report that Claire's just come out, the significant number were teenage mothers here. And I mean, these are hardly, but children themselves. And one of our real concerns is that actually the support is going in the opposite direction for many young women in this situation. The welfare reforms that are actually being discussed today by the House of Lords will actually reduce benefits for young parents. So the pressures on them are often getting harsher rather than us actually looking at these very vulnerable young people, many of whom as society, we ourselves have had responsibility for them in childhood.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, and do let us know your thoughts on this.